He was an intuitive person, he was an artistic person, and the way that he expressed himself was through art. No history, no mathematics. They knew how to build a boat, they knew how to build a house. They would sit and they would talk about it and they would build a house. But if you want to talk about life and death and what's happening to us, that they did it in poetry. Because poetry came out of the unconscious naturally. Poetry is not an invented form. Poetry is like dreams. Who invented dreams? Nobody invented dreams. The dreams are there. And just like our inborn ability, our human ability, the only thing that makes humans unique is they can create stories, and no other animal can. Nowhere in history do we find any other time but this species, human species, tells stories.
Well, I think there's one other difference between humans and animals or other forms of life, and that's that human beings are expected to and destined to evolve during their lifetimes. Animals don't do that.
Right. Well, that's all a matter of, once you create a story, which is a little world. It's not saying I'm hungry like that gorilla up in Atlanta, kick on one banana, All animals can express current, present emotions. I'm angry. They can do it with little blocks, or they can do it with grunts and things like that. But a story is not that. A story is when you want to express a complex emotion and you reach into your past, something triggers it, and you fashion a little world as a beginning and an end. I went down to the river and I saw you. I loved you. Very simple. It's not John Updike, right? It's a very simple story. But no other animal can do that. That's a little world. And once you create those worlds, then you begin to live in those worlds. Human beings today are nothing more than a collection of trillions of stories that keep leaking out of our heads and keep pouring into our heads from dreams, from we don't know where, from our teachers, from TV, from me. I'm telling you stories now. Some of these will stick in your head, some will go out. But we're all stories. And one of those stories that it comes up as a matter of course is that we're on a journey. That's what stories are. There's a beginning, a middle, and end. Once you start to do that, you are on a journey. Time comes out of our storytelling ability. Time comes out of it. Animals live in the present. They have no sense of time. Only we have a sense of time. It doesn't matter that it wasn't all chopped up into little seconds as it is today. It was a sense of past, present, and there's a future. So once you start to take those journeys, then there are journeys in life. It builds to a point that it's almost impossible to comprehend how complex human beings are. Because everything that we know to be true, or false, or hateful, or loving is a story that we've been told, that's been added to, pieces have been forgotten, added to. Bible's a story. Homer's a story, right? All the Sumerian epics are a story. Gilgamesh, all the Egyptian scripts are stories. All the Mayan scripts are stories. Every kid tells you a story when you go down the block about what he did. Stories go on forever. And what happens is they become like a great river that tells us who we are. And then some artist comes along, not as much today as we did in the past, when the only way to express yourself, there was no way of systematizing knowledge. There was no way of writing. 1, 2, 3, point 1, 2. There was no point 1, 2, 3, 4. You just made a poem because they had a different interest in life. That they wanted to be in harmony with the whole cycle of life. They saw it around them. Life, birth, death, war, hatred, love, children, dying, So that's the whole nature of poetry, is to explain that. Not the poetry we have today, which is horrible. It's all conscious, mishy-mashy, nice thoughts or something. What you want is a powerful kind of poetry. And in fact, I think the last one you can see that in is probably Shakespeare, who operated much like the Preliterate poets operated. Even though he was writing dramatic poetry, he was writing it. He just did it. The fact that he was writing it was secondary. It never erased. It just kept going. He just kept going, right? Yeah. So in that sense, it poured out of his unconscious. He had no self. He had no self. Basically, he's. I told you this once, that there was a very highbrow critic by the name of David Steiner, who was going through all of the great novelists and artists of all time, at least up in relatively modern times, and saying that all of these artists had a point to make. There was a meaning to their work. You know, there was a message that was meant to carry. Until he got to Shakespeare, he says there are no ideas in Shakespeare. It's just the miracles to the world. Take it. One like flowers bursting. So that's what it was like to live in an oral society. Poems, and you would hear the poem, and it would go in you, it would fill you. You know, it was going on all around you all of the time. It wasn't just you turned it on. You know, it was going on all the time. You were doing it. The kids were doing it, and they were. Soon over time, what happened is that you had great poets like epic poets like Homer who were doing it, who was so fabulous that the Greeks they couldn't comprehend him. It's like Elvis. It was bigger than Elvis. Much bigger. You know what I mean? It was so big, it was unbelievable. You know. So we just know that because they created a 3-day holiday to hear his poems. His poems, the Odyssey or the Iliad, take 3 days to recite. There was no epic poem even close to that. We know from the holiday structure back in the scholastic things. So they built him a bigger stadium. 3 days. Guys brought their lunch, they sat down, and Homer would just go on, you know. And he was a musician too. You know, he's singing and playing. He's kind of going. He's rocking, you know. He's a great storyteller. No notes, no crib notes, no director. Just let it come out of the collective unconscious and his own genius, which was overpowering. He was like Shakespeare. He couldn't make a mistake, basically, you know. And there, especially since there was no need for him to come up with a new story all the time. Shakespeare was scrambling around to various legends and fables. You know, like the one of Hamlet and Othello. You know, he's trying to get little nuts that he can explode. You know, but he had two. He had the story of the Trojan War, and he had the story of Odysseus. One is a poetic statement about the nature of the preliterate mind, the heroic preliterate consciousness. It's frontal, it's bang, like that. You know, there's no one has any second thoughts. Nobody has any ideas. They're just going to win the war, what it's going to be, and they're going to kill their enemies. And they're driven forth like this. And then you get to the Odyssey. It's the new emerging consciousness, which is one that we have, where in fact Odysseus, which does not mean traveler, it means troublemaker, ball-buster, that he's questioning everything. He's loaded with deceit, you know. He is not frontal at all. He's very evasive and he's very funny about it. He's always figuring the angles. And in fact, the Greeks love that too, because that's what your new mind is like. You can plot alternative actions. You can deceive people, you know, which is what we have tonight.
I wonder if those stories changed, not the events of the story, but the attitude of the speaker, whether it changed during the years, because I've noticed that with stories in general. I'm always interested in hearing people.
You get to pre-literate cultures, there's very little change. You know, it's only when you approach when they're beginning to build into empire, just before they learn to read and write, like in terms of the Babylonians and things like that, they get into with it, or in fact the Egyptians too, before they learn to have the hieroglyphics. But they're basically pretty stable societies. That they're just growing the vegetables or they're herding the animals, you know. And that it's only when we see the emergence of reading and writing and we see the emergence of planned deceit you begin to see walls around cities. So basically they were living as the Happy Valley. It's the Garden of Eden, basically. That's what the Garden of Eden stands for. It's the pre-literate stage.
Garden of Eden with a lot of wars, right?
Individual wars, face slapping, but not these huge kind of planned wars of empire. So that the pre-literate peoples, right up until the end, you can see in terms of the Greeks, they were just about on the edge of becoming literate. You sort of see the building of empires and in fact the building of armies, you know. But before that, if you take a look at they're rather small societies. They're like little villages, 100, 200 people, 500 people, wherever that happens to be. They're living. Until you get a lot of trade between places, you don't see those cultures change. That there's no outside influences coming in. The gods remain the gods. The values remain the values. In fact, in a tribal society, before it becomes feudal, which is what you'd call the age of Achilles, they have these little empires, they all have their little castles, and they're really criminals, basically, what they are. Like Odysseus, he will take what you have and he puts it in his house. They're all like basically, they're thieves, they're pirates, basically, is what they are. They're just, age of pirates, and they're very skilled in warfare. They're just like the samurai, what you got, I'm going to take, and that's the end of it, but I do it for noble purposes. But in terms of things remain the same, there were probably thousands and thousands of stories of Troy. Because Troy happened 700 years before the time of Homer. It's a long time in oral society. There's no records at all. All you have is the oral poems from all of your predecessors, and you only hear your most current predecessors. So, it's really like the ocean coming in. You only know what the ocean said to you yesterday. So you'll find that very slow moving because of that. And how a person was celebrated was how they told the story. There wasn't anything novel about the Iliad. Everybody knew the characters, right? It was Achilles, Hector, Helen, the criminal Paris, running off with the women, right? All that story. Okay, so that's the nature of that. The song was continuous. It was the same song, but it was like the blues that you hear from in terms of the South, from the African Americans. It's pretty much the same song, but it's how the guy did it.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same song. It's a song of sadness. Where you going? I'm so lonely today. That's it. Really, the change Mary or Abigail. Where are you? I'm so lonely today. I could die. But it's how they actually did the song. We don't have that today. We place a real premium on novelty today. So that's what drives the arts. So what you have is a lot of novel shit, but you have nothing that really moves you or that, in the spiritual sense, comforts you. Great art like King Lear or Hamlet or the Iliad or the Odyssey comfort you. It might be destruction coming down like all hell on you, or I think it might be a great love story too, it depends. But no matter which way it goes, creation or destruction, that it comforts you because inside, those mechanics are the life force itself, which you detect. And that's what the surface is, a war or a battle. But in between, it says, this is the way life is. It's not meaningless. Out of tragedy comes rebirth, Or out of comedy, sometimes you can go down. Whatever it is that it mirrors what's going on inside you, so that it comforts you. It doesn't agitate you. You might be crying, but you'll feel better. It's a catharsis. So anyway, that's
Well, thank you, Justin.
long and short of it.
That was lovely, and
That's
the
important to know.
Grasshopper has received your messages and appreciates
Yeah.
them. We look forward to next week.
I know you're a big painting person in the modern world, but that's just novelty. It's just driven by novelty. Everything has to be novelty. Whereas for about 700 years, from the time the Trojan War took place until the time of Homer, it was the same story about the same war. It's like we see in the Middle Ages with the Madonna and Child. Everybody did it. There's no need for novelty. It was still kind of coming from that. It's how you painted. So sometimes the Virgin was squinty, the baby was like crazy, you know what I mean? So it depends. It's the same story, but how you told it. And that's the big difference between those slower moving cultures and ours. One of the big differences. And that they were saturated with art. There was nothing else. There was love, birth, death, eating, and art. And 95% of the art was the poetry, which had a different form, that was not only sung out spontaneously from the unconscious, but it was moved to, and you would paint your face to do it in the early stages. And it was done communally. But that's what you see in the Tarzan movies. Nobody knows what they're doing, but they're really doing a communal poem where they're praising the gods about something, about death or life. And it goes on for hours, and there's no script. It just comes out of the unconscious, and they move to it, they put on their spirit face, which they all have, because they've all gone into lucid dreaming. They've seen that they're a fox, and they'll paint their face like a fox to help them get into that, and they'll start to move as the fox. They moved as animals because that was their, it wasn't rocket ships that interested them, it was the animals, because the animals were very smart. You have to hunt an animal with your bare hands. You know how smart they are and how strong they are. So they were like gods. And don't forget that we had come from animals. I think early man had a very deep respect for them as brothers. It wasn't like you see today, oh, my brother the wolf and stuff like that. You see these corny westerns, with the Indians, but it was one family.